The Sopranos started its run on HBO in the late 90s, and from there on, a certain type of character became very prominent on the TV landscape: the anti-hero. Some of the most influential and highly regarded shows of the past decades are all about these morally gray characters. Characters who do terrible things, but for some reason are able to keep us engaged in their stories, making us empathize with them and even cheer for their success. One of these shows is Mad Men, the series about advertising in the 60s America, where we follow Don Draper, the man who has everything. It seems like Don has a perfect life: a beautiful wife and family, a successful career, and more money than he could ever hope to spend. But deep down, Don is a miserable person, who is always after the next shiny thing that will make him a little happier for a while, until he has to move on to something else. So he drinks, cheats on his wife, abandons his kids, and lies to get whatever he wants. But what makes us keep coming back to the show, wanting to know what happens to him next, even though we hate his guts, is the fact that Don knows that he's a terrible person. He knows he does terrible things, and this destroys him. So Don is constantly trying to change. But even when he does, it's short-lived, and he inevitably goes back to his old destructive ways. Don Draper is a terrible person who wants to be good. On the other end of the spectrum, we have a show like Breaking Bad, where we follow the journey of a good man who turns into a monster. Walter White starts as a mild-mannered chemistry teacher, who after getting diagnosed with cancer decides to manufacture and sell methamphetamine to get enough money to provide for his family after his death. But in this process, he ends up awakening a part of himself who wants more, who craves power and control, who will do anything and use anyone to get what he wants, no matter the consequences. His initial goal becomes just an excuse, something to give him a reason to commit the most heinous acts while still seeing himself as a good person. We are engaged by Walter White's story because it is the age-old tale of the path to hell being filled with good intentions. A cautionary tale about how far we can go for a good cause. And there is one show about a morally gray character who has a little bit of Don Draper and Walter White in him. Like Don Draper, this character is a terrible person who's aware of this and desperately wants to change. And like Walter White, he keeps committing heinous acts of evil for a good cause, lying to himself that if he just does one last terrible thing, he'll be able to be a better person from now on. And this character's name is... Barry is a dark comedy about a former Marine turned hitman. At the beginning of the show, we meet him at his lowest point. He's struggling with depression and questioning his life's purpose, wondering if the only thing he's good for is killing people. Fuse, who's Barry's father figure / partner in crime, notices Barry's growing disinterest and lack of focus on the job, and decides to shake things up, sending Barry to sunny Los Angeles to do a hit for the Chechen mob. But Barry's life forever changes when he follows his new target, Ryan Madison, into an acting class. Here he's dragged into performing a scene together with Ryan, and ends up going out for a drink with the entire class right after. Being on the stage and connecting with a group of welcoming people makes Barry feel alive for the first time in a long while, and he starts thinking that acting may be his true purpose after all, that this is what he's been waiting for, a fresh start and an opportunity to be a better person. So Barry decides to give up his life as a contract killer to pursue an acting career alongside his new friends. Except his past is not something that he can simply walk away from, but Barry is determined to do anything to keep his past from destroying his newfound happiness. Like the shows that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, Barry is about a morally gray character who does terrible things. But unlike the anti-heroes of those other shows, Barry from the get-go and throughout the entire show is an extremely likable character. That's because the series presents us to all of the factors that led Barry into becoming the person that he is. The show wants to explore how people turn to evil, by going beyond simply focusing on the individual, to show how external factors also have a great influence over people's actions. But the show does not do this in order to sugarcoat Barry's actions or excuse his behavior. it makes it very clear how evil Barry's actions are. So much so that the audience and Barry himself end up asking the same question.
Why evil?
In this video, we'll try to answer this question by first understanding what is evil and how easily anyone can be seduced into doing horrible things, to look at how Barry uses these ideas to create a morally grey character that we care about, and most importantly, feel sorry for. To be able to answer this question, we must first understand what is evil. The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines evil as morally reprehensible, causing harm, the fact of suffering, misfortune, and wrongdoing, something that brings sorrow, distress, or calamity. This is a great jumping-on point to get us thinking about evil, but when we start really digging into it, this definition makes us look at things from a very limited point of view. Take this scene from Barry as an example.
No tiene que hacer esto. No tiene que hacer esto. No tiene que hacer esto. No tiene que hacer esto.
If we stick to the dictionary definition for evil, we inevitably end up just focusing on the individual and the act of evil itself, the who did what. And from this angle, we may think that this is a clear example of how evil Barry is. He's killing a man in cold blood after all. But the problem with this approach is that it only tells us half the story. Through this lens, we can only conclude that Barry is doing evil because he's evil. We can't really understand the situation until we start thinking about the bigger picture. How this came to be and why Barry did this. This is the core idea of Philip Zimbardo's body of work. Zimbardo is a social psychologist whose research is all about changing the perspective of not blaming the system for some bad apples. He argues that asking questions such as, who's the bad apple who committed this atrocity, makes us think about evil as just an individual choice or a personal lack of morality. Instead, what we should be asking is, what is responsible? Because more often than not, it is not the who of people, but the what of the situation that is the root cause of evil. In order to test his theories about evil, Zimbardo conducted the controversial Stanford prison experiment. In 1971, a research group of college students led by psychology professor Philip Zimbardo selected a group of 24 extremely ordinary students from Stanford University, students with no history of violent behavior, criminal activities, or psychological issues. He randomly divided the students into two groups, prisoners and guards. Zimbardo instructed the guards to make the prisoners feel powerless, encouraging aggressive behaviors and giving them free rein on how to deal with the prisoners. Zimbardo's goal with this experiment was to showcase how ordinary people could easily be influenced into committing acts of evil and behave like a completely different person simply by being put into a situation where a specific type of behavior is encouraged and backed up by any figure or system of authority. The experiment was supposed to last for 2 whole weeks, but after only 36 hours, the prisoners were showing extreme stress reactions, and after 6 days, the entire experiment was shut down. 5 students from the prisoner group had emotional breakdowns because of the inhuman and degrading treatment they were being subjected to. It took very little time for the students playing the role of guards to become extremely violent and sadistic. In his book, The Lucifer Effect, Understanding How Good People Turn Evil, Zimbardo argues that to understand why people commit acts of evil, we should pay attention to 3 factors.
There are 3 ways. The main way is what's called dispositional. We look at what's inside of the person, the bad apples. This is the foundation of all of social sciences, the foundation of religion, the foundation of law. Social psychologists like me come along and say, yeah, people are the actors on the stage, but you'll have to be aware of what the situation is. Who are the cast of characters? What's the costume? Is there a stage director? And so we're interested in what are the external factors around the individual, the bad barrel. And social scientists stop there, and they miss the big point that I discovered when I became an expert with Harvard grad. The power is in the system. The system creates the situation that corrupts the individuals. The system is the legal, political, economic, cultural background. And this is where the power is of the bad barrel makers. So you want to change the person, you got to change the situation. You want to change the situation, you got to know where the power is in the system. So the Lucifer effect involves understanding human character transformations with these three factors. And it's a dynamic interplay. What do the people bring into the situation? What does the situation bring out of them? And what is the system that creates and maintains that situation?
As Zimbardo said, the true root cause of evil lies not only in the individual, but in the interplay between these three factors, each one bringing something new to the table. And it is only when you consider these three factors together that we can start to have a better understanding of evil. So let's go back to the previous example from Barry and take a look at how each of these factors influence Barry's actions. The dispositional factor is what we usually tend to pay more attention to, and it's what we've already understood from the scene before. The individual Barry is a murderer. But Barry is only doing this because of the situational factor. Barry didn't want to kill anyone.
I don't do this anymore. I don't want to do it.
But he went ahead and did it anyway because his friend Fuse was being held hostage. Which leads into the systemic factor, the power that created the situation to begin with, the Chechen mob. They wanted to use Barry's assassination skills to help them take over the territory of the Bolivian mob. And this is where Barry truly shines. The series is constantly putting Barry's actions through the lenses of these three factors. So let's take a look at the bigger picture and understand how the series presents the systemic, the situational, and the dispositional factors that are responsible for turning Barry into who he is. Before Barry became an assassin, he was a Marine who participated in the Afghanistan War. This can be considered as one of the systemic factors that changed Barry's relationship with violence and murder. And there's a moment on the show where we can see how this affected his sense of morality. During his acting class, Barry, in an effort to be honest and open up to his classmates, starts to tell the class about the war, about the first person that he killed. Barry and his friend Albert were on surveillance duty when Barry saw someone coming in the distance. Not knowing what to do, Barry asked Albert if they should radio their lieutenant for guidance.
No, you don't gotta radio him, man. Take the shot, dude.
The person was very far away. Albert was sure that Barry would miss, and it was only meant to scare the guy away. But Barry doesn't miss. Two other guys show up.
No.
And Barry kills them too. As he tells his story, two other students start performing it. And when Barry sees the other students reenacting the moment as something very heavy, serious, and traumatic, he lies and says that his experience was exactly like that. He does that because he feels ashamed, because the first time he killed someone was the best day of his life. For Barry, killing someone was the first time he experienced a sense of purpose and community. This was a pivotal moment of Barry's life that not only shaped his relationship with death and killing, but also his sense of responsibility over these actions. As part of his military training and experiences, things such as violence and murder became a way of life. During the war, it was seen as something normal, necessary, and right. To do his job, to protect people's lives and his country, Barry was supposed to not think about the consequences of his actions. Instead, he should just follow orders and apply the teachings of his training. The war also had a great impact in Barry's dispositional factor, where one trait of his personality became a growing issue for him. And it all started when his friend Albert was shot during one military operation, something that we'll talk about later in the video. It can be argued that during the war, Barry had sort of a valid reason to murder people. But according to Barry's acting teacher,
I think that you will all agree with me that if you kill outside of war, you're a psycho. I mean, then you're irredeemable. Am I right? Yes.
And here is where the situational factor comes into play. After Barry returned from Afghanistan, he was extremely depressed. He wouldn't leave his house for months. He felt alone, lost, and without a purpose. That's when Fuse, who's like a father to Barry, came up with a new purpose for him. Fuse told Barry that the things he did during the war could be useful here. He gave Barry a well-paying job that made use of his skills and knowledge, with a big caveat. He tells Barry that he'll only have to kill really bad people. Phils is at the same time a bit of a systemic and situational factor. He puts Barry back into a system that he's comfortable with. Like in the army, Barry doesn't have to think about his actions, he simply needs to follow orders. And Phils creates a situation where Barry can continue to do these same things he believed he was doing back in Afghanistan, killing bad people. And for a while, being a hitman really did help Barry, but eventually, his depression came back, and that's where we meet him at the beginning of the show, the moment he realizes two very important things. Killing people makes him miserable, and he can't handle the guilt over his actions anymore. But when Barry stumbles into the acting class, he feels motivated and happy for the first time in a long while. He discovers a new passion, a new purpose and desire. He wants to try to be an actor and a better person. But when Phils hears about Barry wanting to quit being a contract killer to pursue an acting career, this is what he has to say about it.
You're a killer, Barry. You kill the bad guys.
Yeah, but this Ryan guy wasn't a bad guy. He lent me a book.
Stop thinking. Kill Ryan. This is what you do. This is all you do. Do you understand?
Phils manipulates Barry and convinces him to give up on this idea, emphasizing that he can't do anything else, that this is all he is. And here's another example of this type of manipulation. Barry and Phils get into an argument because Taylor, a former Marine and a friend of Barry's friend, figured out that Barry is a hitman. Taylor wants to join Barry in his next job, assaulting a Bolivian mob warehouse. Hearing about this, Phil simply says that Barry should do the job with Taylor and kill him right after. Barry refuses to do it, since they're only supposed to kill bad people. But then Phil starts to play into Barry's fears, telling him that he has no choice, that Taylor knows too much and could ruin Barry's new life. Phils also takes advantage of Barry's experience with the military, saying that he shouldn't forget his training, that he should simply follow orders and stop thinking about things. Through moments like these, we can see how difficult it is for Barry to change. Even though he's able to discern right from wrong, Phils is very good at taking advantage of Barry's traumas in order to make him go against his own wishes. Still, Barry wants to chase his new purpose and become a better person more than anything. But even if he's able to break away from Phil's influence, he'll still have to deal with the final factor that influences him to evil: himself. One of the reasons we're able to empathize so much with Barry is the fact that Barry himself is able to discern right from wrong, and is constantly forced into situations that leave him little choice in committing acts of evil, which is what we explore through the systemic and situational factors. But during the course of the story, some of the most atrocious acts of evil that Barry commits come not from outside pressure, but from Barry's own decisions. Many times throughout the show, Barry makes conscious decisions to commit acts of evil for purely selfish reasons, to escape the consequences of his actions and to hide his secrets, all to preserve the new life that he's built for himself in LA. But Barry takes no pleasure in doing these horrible things. These choices are not easy, and are not things that he simply forgets about. He's only able to keep on going because he hopes that after just one more evil action, he'll be able to get his life back on track and be a better person. Except there's something inside Barry that, when it shows up, makes him act impulsively and violently: his anger. During the war, there was a mission where Albert was shot in the middle of a town. At this moment, Barry is consumed by rage. Without thinking twice, he gets up, goes into a house, and murders a man in cold blood. And he did this because he thought that was the guy who shot Albert. But he wasn't. Barry murdered an innocent man inside of his own house in front of his wife. This event is the biggest shadow in Barry's life. This is what makes Barry see himself as a monster that does not deserve to have a good life. And during the course of the show, we see other situations where Barry's uncontrollable rage drives him into doing terrible things, and how every single time he gives into his rage, he ends up horrified over his own actions. Shows about anti-heroes make us face the complexities of human nature by showing us how the line between good and evil is not as clear-cut and distant as we usually like to think. Philip Zimbardo supports this idea. As he puts it, the line that separates good from evil is movable, so no one is completely good or completely evil. As he tried to show with the Stanford prison experiment, ordinary people, depending on the situation, are capable of doing horrible things. And these same people can also stop committing atrocities if their situation changes too. Good people can be seduced into evil, and evil people can be rehabilitated. Philip Zimbardo in shows about anti-heroes try to make us think about evil by looking at the bigger picture, focusing on understanding why evil happens, instead of simply judging individuals. And this idea is at the core of Barry. The series wants to show us the many different factors that explain why Barry does what he does, and why Barry is the way he is. From larger systemic factors that shaped his relationship with violence and murder, giving birth to Barry's uncontrollable rage and severe depression, to situational factors that force or influence him to kill people even when he does not want to. And also his own dispositional factors that result in Barry acting out his rage in violent outbursts or even murdering people for his own selfish reasons, clearly thinking through his actions and their consequences. But when that happens, Barry is as disgusted by his actions as we are. So even as he keeps committing horrible acts after horrible acts, understanding this larger context allows us to not judge Barry, but instead feel sorry for him. We get that he does not do these terrible things for pleasure. He does these things because that is the only way he knows how to act. The show is about him desperately wanting to change, to be a better person, because he fears that deep down, this is who he is after all, an evil monster. So the reason Barry is so obsessed with doing anything, no matter the cost, to protect his new life is because he thinks that if anyone discovers who he really is, they'll never forgive him, and he'll lose the thing he wants the most: a happier life surrounded by loving people. People who support his goals and who give him an opportunity to be a better person. And it is this fear of rejection that keeps pushing Barry into his impulsive and violent tendencies, keeping him stuck within a system and situations that incite the worst in him. So to answer the question, is Barry evil, with a simple yes or no, may be really tempting. But what we learn from the show is that life is messy and complex. Maybe the best answer to this question comes from Philip Zimbardo himself.
This is a wonderful cartoon in the New Yorker which really summarizes my whole talk. I'm neither a good cop nor a bad cop, Jerome. Like yourself, I'm a complex amalgam of positive and negative personality traits that emerge or not depending on the circumstances.
Hello! Thank you so much for watching my video. I really hope that you enjoyed. My goal with this video was make you interested in checking out Barry, because I think that Barry is one of the best TV shows on right now. Because besides everything that I talked about in the video, Barry is also a hilarious comedy. I seriously find myself laughing out loud every single episode, so I hope that I got you interested in checking it out if you haven't already. Also, if you're still watching this, please consider subscribing to the channel, because if you like this video, I'm sure you're going to enjoy next month's video, where I'm going to talk about one of the greatest graphic novels ever made and the secret behind its controversial sequel. See you next month.